Hey, I'm Jamie Starsevich with Spruce Road, and in today's video, we are going to be doing something I love doing, which is a form of designer detective work, which I call dissecting type. So I'm going to walk through a few brands and share with you the fonts in use, why they work, and just some tips to take with you into your next design project. So why do I like to focus on dissecting type? I think it's a good question, and it's something that I feel like as designers, we innately do. As we're on Instagram, Pinterest, Dribbble, a restaurant, wherever you are, you're kind of wondering, and you're picking up these design details, and you're wondering, what are those fonts in use? And really the deeper question is like, why is this design working, right? And so dissecting type really helps us to grow and expand our type knowledge. It helps us to identify what works in a brand, like identifying exactly why does this brand feel like it's harmonious and this works, like this packaging design works, while the next one next to it falls flat. It's kind of helping us to decipher what works and what doesn't. And really the main thing I love about it is it helps us to see brands in action rather than like a style tile on a Pinterest board or like a brand board that a designer posts that really looks lovely, but it doesn't show the design in context. And so this helps us to, as designers, to identify what works once it's actually in context. So you can take this sleuthing skill set several places. You can take it with you to your restaurant. Likely you're already doing these things. When you get handed the menu at the restaurant, you're already kind of looking at, oh, this looks like a nice layout. Or if you notice, especially if you're a non-designer and you notice this is hard for me to understand what I want to order or hard for me to navigate, that's likely due to a typography issue. So you can take this sleuthing skill set to restaurants when you're looking at menus, packaging design in grocery stores. I do this all the time. It might be kind of weird, but I just kind of look around at all the different shampoo bottle options and see like what works, what doesn't. You're likely doing this when you're looking at packaging design. If you're perusing like a boutique store, they have a more curated kind of packaging design products, and it's really inspirational to look there. Whereas at the grocery store, you're just going to get a wide range of packaging options. So you can take this really everywhere. Websites, where else? I wrote down some other ideas. Magazines and ads you see. It's design is everywhere, marketing's everywhere. And so uncovering what works typographically is a skill set that you can take with you wherever you are and help you grow as a designer. So let's go ahead and dig into some dissecting type. We're going to do some detective work. So let's go ahead and pull this up. I've got one of my favorite brands here, Appointed. And they've recently launched this website and it's just stunning, of course. Their products are beautiful. And what I love about this brand is how they use typography to really support their product photography. And I'm just going to dig into, this is off the cuff. I haven't really prepared anything other than identifying the fonts in use. I'm just going to dig into what works about this brand. So first of all, this is the homepage. And I just love that it's very clear, the call to action right here. And this gets into some web strategy as well. But really this works because of the typography and how it's set, kind of the wireframing portion of setting type. So it's really clear how you want to direct people. There's minimal type, and beautiful photography doesn't hurt. But there's a lot of contrast here, right? We've got this large serif here, which is called Austin News. And then this is Garamond right here as a supporting. And the type up here in the navigation is Trade Gothic, I believe, in expanded form. And these fonts work really well together. The reason is because this is a really modern expanded sans font, which is like lets a lot of room to breathe. It feels very fresh. It's small. And paired that with this serif here that's large, there's a lot of contrast. There's naturally going to be contrast when you have a sans serif and a serif font paired together. So that already forms a nice contrast. Build that in with this is all caps and tracked out in more of an expanded font. And this is more of a narrow serif here. This is more classic and traditional. there's just a lot of contrast there. So you kind of know what the distinction is between this type here. And then Garamond is just a really great go-to if you're looking for a brand that has, if you're working for a brand that has more of those traditional aspects, more of that kind of classic or heritage feel to it. Something like Garamond is a great complement and a great designer go-to. You know it's going to work. It's very legible and it's great for body copy as well. So these fonts here have a really nice kind of contrast as well. I don't believe this headline font, this Austin News, would have worked as well in a body copy just because it's a little bit more narrow, whereas Garamond is a little bit more open. And historically, it's known to have great legibility when reading for body copy. So you can see here again, this trade Gothic comes in down here as really just small elements, especially in all caps. It really distinguishes from the title, even though they might be set in a really similar font size. So that's kind of first glance why this works. I also want to talk about color. It's something that as designers, we can really obsess over and just swoon over fun color palettes. But let's just take a look at this brand. I feel like as a designer, you can look at this and say, this is a beautiful site, really easy to navigate, beautiful photography. But did you notice there's like no color in the brand itself? They have color pulled in through photography in their product photos. But the brand itself is all grayscale. It's like gray, light gray here, white background. And this might be like a charcoal or a black here for their text. So I just wanted to point to that this brand clearly does not depend on color when designing for their application for their own brand. Now for their products, they've got lots of great neutrals and colors like that that they pulled in. But for the brand itself, it's all pretty neutral. And then for contrast, we talked about just the contrast of the modern sans with the more traditional serif. And that helps build in hierarchy. So it helps the user really know what to read and the order to read it. They're very intentional in how they set the type here. I also want to point to patterns and submarks. This is another thing that as designers, I'm including myself because I love this stuff. I eat this stuff up. I don't see any submarks on here or any patterns. You know, Appointed doesn't have that. Even in their products, I don't think they have patterns except for maybe like a grid. I'm very familiar with their product line. So they have their main logo here. This is what they've used here as well on the foil stamp. And even on their packaging, let's see if I can find that up here in the belly band. It's just the same. They use that A, they just pull it directly from here. It's really simple. So they don't have 10 submarks. They don't have a huge color palette for their own brand. They do for their products. It's a little bit different than maybe a service-based company. Well, let's go to their About page. I love to look at, when I'm looking at web and dissecting type, I love going to the About page because typically there's going to be a lot more text there, specifically for e-commerce brands, than there would be on those other pages, those shop pages. So I'm looking again for submarks, patterns, things like that. I'm not seeing any other than their main logo here. And even in their packaging, it's just repeating their logo here. It's just a really beautiful brand. They're not afraid to go large with this type here and really build in that contrast and hierarchy. And they've got supplemental information just much smaller. So they've done a good job of intentionally setting the type here. So this is the entire brand. You can see, again, there's minimal distractions. They've clearly focused on type first, and this is a real type-driven brand. I love to come here and see what they're up to. You can subscribe to their newsletter, buy their products, and you'll really get, if you follow on their newsletter, some really great typography inspiration as well when they do their different promos for product launches. Okay, next up we've got a concept project that I designed. I'm just going to walk through the type used here and again dissect it for you, revealing those fonts in use and why they work. So first up, I just want to say this is, I don't even know what this is. Maybe this is a packaging for a candle or a label. It doesn't really matter. I'm doing a concept project here. I encourage you to do something similar just to really get out of, if you're doing client work, get out of that zone, or even for your own brand, get out of using the same font and do something creative to push yourself and focus specifically on type. So if you watched the last video, I went through the layers of design and I implemented that same process when creating this concept here. So let's dig into what works and why. First of all, hierarchy is the main thing I talk about when it comes to typography and why it works. It's very clear here that Holiday Spruce is where I want you to look first, and then kind of below that, the descriptor. And then these are kind of tertiary marks here that you don't really need to pay attention to as much, more of the supporting typography elements. Maybe it's kind of more logistical in nature, but it's really important to kind of number off. You can even go through as you're writing, as you're using content, number off, like this is 1. I want people to focus on this 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you can create type accordingly. That doesn't mean it needs to scale like that so rigidly in terms of, or literally in terms of font size, but just pay attention to how you're setting the type and making sure you're building that contrast and hierarchy. This is probably the number one thing that you see in a layout design that doesn't work as well compared to one that does work, is likely there's an issue with hierarchy. We talked about restaurant menus is a good example. Packaging design, shampoo bottles, for instance. If you're at the grocery store, like looking for a new product, you'll likely run into some kind of hierarchy issues. If you're looking at medicine, that's another good one of like, okay, what age does this work for? I've got kids at home. So I'm like, where's the age on here? Like, can I give this to my 2-year-old, or is this just for 6 and up? And that's often kind of hidden. And if you know what the user's looking for, you need to really build that into your design process. Again, having that concept in mind and making sure that you're designing with intentionality, hierarchy, and then you can build in the aesthetics afterwards. This kind of gets into the form versus function debate, which I'm not going to get into here, but always be designing with function in mind and making sure that you are creating a typography system that works. So first of all, I know you're like, what are these fonts? This is OGG right here, OGG. And I just love this typeface. It's really beautiful. It's more calligraphic. I don't know how you say it. Calligraphy inspired. And so it's a really nice typeface to use for displays. You can certainly go beyond just a couple words if you want. But in this case of using it in the italics here, I think it works really great as a display. And then below that is DIN Condensed. And this is a really great go-to sans for myself. I love using DIN. It's a very versatile typeface. And the condensed is just really nice as well. I feel like there's a lot of contrast here just in nature of, again, this is more of a display, calligraphy inspired. And this is more of an industrial kind of sans, and it's condensed. And so there's a lot of contrast here. You're not going to confuse which is which if the hierarchy is all the same, like it's very clear. And then this is Sweet Sans up here. This is another go-to of mine. I use it for my own brand, and we use it for a few of our clients as well. And I believe this is the light small caps version. And I just think it's a beautiful, really nice expanded sans serif font. And I love using it tracked out with some letter spacing here. And then below, again, it's just Sweet Sans repeated and OGG repeated here just subtly, just in like minimal type. So there's only 3 fonts you can use. I don't think there's necessarily a rule. Some designers will say no more than 3 in a layout. And I don't believe that's a hard and fast rule. I think all these kind of rules can be broken if you want. But for this layout, I did do 3. There's just really not that much type. And it's a really straightforward layout. It's not something that's really visually kind of all over the place or like a collage or anything like that. It's more minimal and kind of sophisticated in nature. And so I stuck to just 3 fonts here. But hierarchy, legibility is always key to look into, and contrast. All of those are achieved through the design. Now, I do have a lot of color in this one, but I designed in black and white first. And so I know that this layout is really strong typographically. And then I started incorporating colors. I'd imagine if this was for a client, maybe this is the different kind of scents for the candles. Maybe they have like, how many is this? 9 holiday scents. And we could use these different colors for that. Or even if the brand doesn't have all of those scents yet, but maybe eventually they will, it's nice to build in a system that would work long term for them as they grow and expand. So that's Holiday Spruce. That's really all I've got for you on dissecting this. It's pretty minimal type, but overall it works because of hierarchy and contrast and really clear distinction between that kind of display and kind of the logistical information down here as well. Okay, lastly, we have Quinns. Let's go ahead and dive into dissecting this. So we went through Appointed, which is a website. You can really see the brand and application there. Second, we went through a concept project that showed like more of a packaging element. And lastly, we're walking through Type, working in a system with the brand identity. So the logo type and submarks here, just to give you kind of a diverse field of looking and analyzing and being that detective when it comes to dissecting type. So Quinns is a concept brand that I created, and it's really my focus on it was to really push myself creatively into manipulating letter forms and using type that I haven't used for clients before, purchasing new fonts that were new to me, and really playing with those kind of styles here, making sure I'm focusing specifically on typography and letter forms to create a beautiful, seamless, timeless brand. So first of all, Quinns is a customized logo type here. It's based off of Hebden. And I customized the Q here, just this tail. And I believe the rest of it was pretty straightforward here. It's a really legible font. And I love kind of the distinctive qualities of it. When it comes to logo types, one thing that I really look for in a strong logo type is something that's distinctive. Whereas some of the other designs that we looked at, the Appointed brand, I didn't even talk about how strong their logo is. I looked more about the typesetting on the site, and same thing with the Spruce packaging. There wasn't even a logo on there. So this one, I'm going to be focusing on the logo element. So I really look for distinctive type when it comes to logo type. That doesn't mean it needs to be really wild and out there, but just something that doesn't look like came on a system font on a computer. Really, you want something that looks intentionally and thoughtfully designed by a trained designer. And so I feel like Hebden has some very distinctive qualities in here, and how they've kind of have these angular terminals over here and serifs, as well as it seems very friendly and straightforward. It works well in a logo type because it's legible and it's also very distinctive. The Q it came with was just fine how it was. I believe it was kind of down and then across. But I really wanted something that worked more in a logo type form that felt tighter. And this Q, I feel like comes in nicely and has a nice negative space when connected to this U here. And also doesn't go too far down if I were to use just the Quinns type here on a website or something like that. It feels very cohesive and tight together. So I just customized this. You don't have to go overly customizing. Actually, I believe this part here, the counter, was customized as well. But you don't have to go in depth customizing every letter form. Some designers might disagree on that, but that's just my perspective. And legally, if you check with the font license, you should be good there. Some fonts do restrict that, so just be mindful of that. But I'm not going to get too into the weeds about that. I focus more on that in my course. But let's go ahead and dig into these submarks. So I love a good submark design, and this is something I talk about extensively in the course, is how to build submarks that work long-term for your brand or your client's brands. And really, when you're stumped for what kind of submark to create, beyond something like this that seems more obvious, beyond repurposing the brand name, there's a few different categories I love to pull from when it comes to submark design. And this is one of them, which is really just kind of a descriptor submark. So what is Quinns? Well, it's the best plant nursery in Boulder. That's what it is. And this uses Bordenaro Spur. This is the main font here. And this is Bordenaro Script. So this is a two-style font that works well together. They're very different fonts. You know, one's a script, one's a kind of a serif. But they work really well together, and they're intended to work well together. And so that's what I pulled from here. There's a lot of contrast just in the nature of the two different styles of fonts. But it's also a very legible submark that we could use on like footer of the website. These could be stickers they put on packaging. Really just very versatile. And then below that here, I have no idea. I'm not from Boulder. I visited before, but I'm just assuming, maybe someone calls it BOCO. Boulder, Colorado. And so I got this Q here, and on either side I've got in a Grotesque Display is the font used. And this is just a great sans serif font. I felt like it was bold, and so it paired well with this here. It's an expanded sans as well. So I would use this. I'd actually pull in this sans serif into different subheads, things like that. When actually laying out the type, that's an option. I could use this up here, this Bordonaro, as well for display. So those are the different fonts in use. How they work well together is a great question, because as you're designing logos, you want to make sure the logo type and submarks work seamlessly well together while not competing with each other. You don't want a submark, especially if you're working with clients, where they think, is this my logo or is this my submark? They don't know what a submark is maybe. And so you want to make a very clear distinction between them. And also just for the end user, you don't want them to get confused on, there's so many submarks, and so they're confused on what's the logo and what's kind of a secondary brand element. And so I love this because it's very clear this is not the logo here. And same thing, this is not the logo. This is just kind of a brand supporting graphic. And as well with the flowers, that's obviously not the logo. But the Bordonaro Spur, I feel like pairs well with this Hebden because they both have that kind of a vintage feel. Like I felt like it could go back to like botany, like vintage seed packets, something like that. And I wanted to pull that kind of heritage into the brand without having such a direct and obvious correlation to that inspiration of like vintage botanical seed packets, for instance. But both of these fonts here have these nice kind of angular serifs, but they're not the same font. This one, the logo type is very distinct from the rest of the typography used, which I really love that. It can set it aside on its own without competing with other type in use. And these fonts really pair well together while having that very obvious, clear distinction, but having some connection to one another with that kind of heritage element as well as those kind of serifs in use. All right, so that is it for doing some detective work on these 3 different designs. Hopefully you walked away with a few new font finds as well as some tips on laying out type. I want to walk away with one more quick tip that you can do. It takes maybe a minute to install on your computer, which is the Chrome extension called WhatFont. And this is a handy tool I use really almost daily when I'm on websites and I'm just curious, what font are they using? It's a question us designers have all the time. And you can just install this plugin. It's free on Chrome. If you don't use Chrome, if you use Safari or something like that, just install Chrome. That's free as well. And just have that one plugin. And you can go to these different sites and see exactly what fonts are being used there. Let me show you an example. So we are here on Appointed Site. We're back here. I've got my plugin installed called WhatFont. And I just simply click it and I hover over. It says this is Austin News Headline. This is Garamond, and this is Trade Gothic, just as we discussed earlier. Then you can click these here and it goes into more details if you are looking for specifics on web. This is more that kind of CSS element, but you can use this really on any site to uncover what fonts are in use and help you kind of expand your typography knowledge. So go ahead right now, if you haven't already installed WhatFont on your Chrome browser, and have that plugin ready, and you can start dissecting type on your own. I'm looking forward to our next video where I'm going to be sharing a full case study project with you of a complete type-driven brand and walk through what works, what fonts are in use, and why it all works together. Everything from logo type to submark to layout design. So I'll see you next time.